All right, hi everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. You've tuned into a Fireside chat about diversity and inclusion. I'm going to let Adam and Leon introduce themselves, but I'm Cinzia. I'm Diversity and Inclusion Advisor at Splash Damage. I've been at Splash for about 3 years and started doing that role recently, where my role is making sure that diversity and inclusion is at the forefront of what we do at Splash Damage. Adam, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Adam Campbell. I'm Director of Product at Azoomee and DaVinci Media, which is the #1 kids edutainment company. I'm also co-founder of POC in Play, which is Europe's largest advocacy group for racial diversity in video games. I'm also a member of BAFTA, and I've been in the video games industry for more than 11 years now. And I've had previous roles at organisations such as Miniclip, Sega, and JAGX.
I'm Leon Killin. I am founder of Balance Patch, which is the UK's a diversity inclusion consultancy service for the games industry in the UK. I've previously worked in various inclusion and diversity projects in higher education before moving over to gamers quite recently. Also on leadership Outmaker Games.
Cool. So we're gonna have quite a long conversation through this, where we're gonna be going through kind of the journey of first how we hire, how we make sure that we consider diversity in hiring, and then how we think about company culture and how we make sure that once we've hired those diverse pool of people, that we keep them in the studio for as long as possible, and we give them a chance to feel like they're being listened to. So like the first big question, I guess, is what can studio do to hire more diverse? If one of you want to kick us off.
Sure, shall I go?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll kick off. So I think that one of the biggest temptations in hiring, maybe more so the video games industry from what I've seen, is also one of the biggest problems. And that is the tendency to hire people that you know within your own personal networks. Now, obviously that can give you candidates who you trust. It can also be a quick way to find people with particular skills that you're looking for. However, that does reduce the pool of candidates that you might bring on board. So one of the most important things, in my opinion, is looking for multiple sources for your candidates. So that can be personal networks, but also multiple agencies potentially, job boards that target underrepresented or marginalised groups, and also reaching out to other people perhaps within your industry who perhaps come from a different background or demographic to yourself, who can also reach diverse candidates.
Yeah, I completely agree with all that stuff. I think it's very, very much. I've been in games for about a year and a half now, so the sort of difference in terms of hiring is quite striking. I didn't appreciate what a tiny, big industry games was, and this sort of very, in a very, very short space of time, how many people I knew who knew someone who knew someone who then knew someone who I knew who then they knew, which is really surprising. I think, and very hard to appreciate before you're in industry, but also at the same time, it's quite an insular industry. It's very, I think it can be quite difficult to break in. And personally, I feel quite fortunate to have met the people that I did when I did, but it's not everyone's experience. A lot of people kind of experience sort of almost a sort of orbiting around the edge of the industry, and it being hard just to break into the network, let alone getting an actual job with the industry. I think the industry is a little scared of what talent is available outside. It hasn't come up with like, my first job was in games and now I'm in games and here is games, and like that's the be all end all. I think it's sort of very stuck on games specific experience. Must have shipped X number of games and must have been in roles for a certain number of years. Whereas I think a lot of marginalized folks struggle to get even transferable experience. And I think it's very hard for games to break out of its own shell in that regard. Particularly when I think talk to particularly sort of LGBT folks, that's my corner of specialization in particular. They talk about saying, oh yeah, I went to university and I got this, but I know my straight peers got a foot in the door more easily, or that's compounded by other identities. So, for example, my white peers got a foot in the door much more easily. I think games would do well to sort of open up what it expects from people. I think they'd be really. I think by and large we'd be quite surprised to see what we could achieve with transferable skills that aren't just, oh yeah, I shipped this game, did this thing, did that, because there are a lot of really talented people coming up that sort of traditional. Go to uni, get the computer science degree, programming, and to get in that way. I think sort of widening what we're looking for, what we expect, I think would help a lot with diversifying yet as far as industry.
Yeah, and I mean, it's been proven as well through data that having a diversity as far as industry goes will make you more likely to be successful as a company. And that's something that we're so scared that we think that you need to have games experience to understand how to ship a game. But there's so much transferable skills from other industries that would give us like a completely brand new experience, like a brand new point of view that we're missing entirely because we're trying to like close ourselves within the industry, and because of like needing to have that network of people before you can make it into the industry. And yeah, we're missing on so much talent and so many things that we wouldn't consider because we're not having those people. We're not having the people with different experiences and different like pathways into the industries that will bring those completely new point of views that we're missing out on. But so what can companies do to help with that? Like how can they find that pool of talent that isn't just the people from the games industry? Like what do you think can be done for that?
Yeah. So from my perspective, I am a hiring manager. And I've done hiring over the last several years, actually, within especially the production field. Sometimes, kind of the adjacent job areas such as user experience and so on and so forth. And I think for me, one of the first things is making sure that the job adverts are visible in multiple places where possible. Mm-hmm. If you're a game specific or even a games biased company, it can be tempting to think, what are the famous games industry publications or games industry job boards which you can post in? And that's probably going to find people who are specifically looking for games jobs, probably already from the games industry. And if they're not in the games industry, there might be people who are looking to take their first step in the industry. So obviously there's going to be a pool of candidates out there from different backgrounds, different industries, which won't see those. So yeah, I think it's important to think about the places where you're posting jobs. Like I said, working with external agencies where possible. Not all applicants have to be direct. Sometimes recruiters are a good option. On a personal level, when I look for candidates for a new role, I'm very specifically trying to find a short list of candidates from different industries and different levels of experience. My organization, Azoomee, kind of sits on the intersection of lots of different industries. There's a bit of video on demand, there's games, and obviously with that we intersect with like the TV and film industry. So we know that with our different content types and our different technologies, we know that people can offer different things to organization. But with that in mind, I do like to think, okay, well, these people work in film, these people work in games, this person maybe works in finance. For me, it doesn't matter where they're coming from. It's just considering what they could potentially bring in terms of their skill set to the business. But if you actually go in with that mindset, I think that does actually set you up for a very different path when it comes to recruitment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yeah, well, what you're saying as well with like relying on non-game specific things, like even simple as like LinkedIn, you can use that as a tool to reach out to more industries, and just like you use what's there and like use those tools to reach out to the right people and look for those people. But with that as well, like something that's important to make sure that we don't shy away from is the idea of positive action, and the idea that it's something that can be done. And so something that's always important to me is that misunderstanding of positive action versus positive discrimination, and how easy it is to think that you're doing positive discrimination. And so to kind of like give an idea, positive action is when you have candidates that are of the same, that are like two strong candidates, but you decide to go for the candidates from a minority background because you're looking to increase that diversity in your team. Whereas positive discrimination is hiring someone because they're from a minority background, regardless of the of their skills or like what they could bring to the team, which will also lead to like bad things, because once they're in the studio, they're gonna feel useless. So it's never good to do positive discrimination, but it's important to remember that positive action is legal, positive discrimination isn't, but it's very difficult to do positive discrimination unless you're just hiring some, like whoever, just because they're from a minority background. So that's something that like, that's worth remembering. And when you're looking to like interview people, if you've got the CVs in front of you and you've got people that seem that they'll all be qualified, to try and interview those people from minority backgrounds as much as possible, because it's going to bring you, again, there's like brand new ideas that you would not be seeing. And so kind of want to going into that and going about like this, and you were talking about like the best skills, etc. How do we steer away, and like what's dangerous about the idea of the best person for the job?
I mean, if there's a phrase that really frustrates me, it is this kind of best person for the job narrative. I'm surprised it's not on a T-shirt somewhere, because it becomes rolled out constantly, and it's a really consistent weapon, I think, against hiring diversity or diversifying who you have in your studios, because it's so like, oh, we just hired the best person, and it's so funny. All these best people are white, cis men, probably straight. It's funny that like the best people just happen to be that, this the same sort of group of people. And I think when we hear this kind of like, oh, we hired the best people for the job, there's a lot of unseen and unspoken about advantage in how these people became the best people for the job. How did they become the best person for the job? Well, a lot of the time what we're actually saying is this person got a lot of coaching to present themselves as the very, very best candidate for this position. It's in things like, assistance from a parent perhaps who is in a well-paid job that can give you advice on how to write a good CV and cover letter, or a friend of a family who can give you some good coaching on how to interview well. And what I found sort of in various, particularly working with young marginalized people, is they don't always have access to those soft experiences and that soft skill to even get a foot in the door, to show that they are actually really damn good at what they do. And there's not an easy answer to sort of like how to tackle that problem, because interviews are interviews and interviews. You've got to do something to get, you know, to get to know what someone's about. But the people who are best for the job, quote, I think tend to, funnily enough, be a mixture between what Adam was talking about earlier of just happen to know someone and you happen to also be the best person for the job. Interesting, that. And also just happen to be in a position where they've perhaps had enough interview experience in games specifically that they know what a games interview format looks like. Because, you know, I can say quite candidly and personally that a games recruitment process is wildly different to, you know, different industries. Very, very different to higher education. Like, so different. You know, the number of times people say, "Oh yeah, let's have a chat." I'm like, "Yeah, let's have a chat," and realize as we're getting on the call, actually, it's an interview. And go, "Oh, shit, yeah, it's an interview. Oh no," because to me, a chat is a chat. You know, and followed by things like tests or like, you know, various kind of skills-based things that I think until you even get the opportunity to see what that process is like, you have no idea what it is. So when you get into it, you might vomit for no reason, you know, of your own, no reason that you don't have, you know, you're not an excellent artist, you're not an excellent programmer, you're not an excellent marketer, you know, any of these things, but just you haven't had access to those soft skills that a lot of professional families, for example, you know, there's loads of compounding things. These are just some sweeping things, but man, best person for the job always really makes me pull a face, because I'll see some people say, "Oh yeah, I went for this job," and I go, "How did you not get it? You are excellent." And it boggles my mind in so many ways.
I mean, from my perspective, it's a very loaded term. In my opinion, the best person for the job is the person who your organization might need right now. Also the person who can add something a little bit extra, a little bit different, the X factor, so to speak. And that thing is not always going to be something that you've already seen before. So it's always worth keeping a bit of an open mind. I spoke a lot about trying to diversify the sources by which you find candidates. I think that's a very good starting point. So when you are shortlisting people, they're not all from the same industry. They didn't all go to necessarily the same university. They don't all have the same years of experience, because again, these are often very superficial things. You want to find ways to really drill into what those candidates are capable of. So when you have a nice diverse pool of candidates with all of these different skills from different places, in terms of some of the personal techniques I try to use, number one, I usually always do interviews with another member of staff. So it's usually someone who works in a slightly different function. So let's say I'm going to be the director of product. I might also have like an engineering lead or perhaps a creative director. So you have two views from two different functions of the organization. We might also happen to have, different backgrounds, not always guaranteed, but who knows, someone might come from a more corporate place, the other person might come from startups. But just by having two people already, it helps you to start to reduce bias. And when it comes to kind of interview techniques itself, it's something that I think about a lot as well. So I never really ask anything which is too academic. I don't want to challenge people just on memory skills. I don't try to use questions which are going to catch people out, because again, different people might respond differently to those sorts of things. I try to create scenarios which are very practical and realistic, because ultimately we don't want someone to, pass, 10 out of 10 from a pre-scripted test with everything has to be this particular answer. It's more about finding out how that person can solve different problems within your organization, or how they would approach different challenges. So, you know, again, in terms of interview techniques, I think it's really important to try and, in a way, help your candidate express what makes them good for the role, rather than sort of the other way around, trying to catch them out. So those are a couple of things for me. And obviously, after you get through a first interview stage, a lot of companies do subsequent interviews where, again, I think it's important to bring in another voice. You know, and with your interview panels, try to make sure that they're diverse. You know, not all men or not all women. You know, people from different ethnic groups. I think those are kind of like conscious steps you can take. And the idea is not to bias the results of the person you're hiring, but just to try and reduce the bias of those panels themselves, or to at least give a few different perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
and sorry.
I was going to say, like, and I think when you do get a fairly diverse pool of candidates, it should be challenging. But, who is the best person for the job? Actually, that's a really challenging question. There's not a clear, like, oh yeah, this person answered everything really, really easily, or really, really to the sort of the letter. Actually, there are a few candidates that bring something very, very different. This is going to be a challenge because they're going to bring something different. Is that the kind of experience you've had with some of your interview? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, you know, I do like to think that, you know, I've always got a really strong stream of candidates with all the required skills, and often it does come down to, you know, is there something unique that this person can bring to the business amongst the other candidates, in order to, you know, take us further in our goals. But obviously, you know, like I said, it is important to try and be super objective about these things. Like, you can't say, oh, well, this person likes, you know, a specific game that I like as well, so I think they're the one who should be hired. You know, you still have to be appreciative of people's actual work experience and their technical skills, and, you know, have they studied a specific course which perhaps contributes to their ability to be a good practitioner. So you do need to take those objective factors about their skills, as well as thinking, okay, well, this person is a good fit for the organization because they can add a little bit of this or a little bit of that, without going down the route of, you know, this is our cultural fit, we want you to be this person. You know, your culture should be a melting pot of you know, different unique people. We should never try to create a preconceived idea of what culture must be.
I like to call it cultural add. Like, what are you trying? Like, what are you adding onto the company? But and to add to that as well, like, what I like to do is having specific set of questions that I ask everyone, so that I get enough of, like, to a point where, like, the answers will be what guides the way that I'm judging, rather than, like, what I'm seeing. And, like, having the same questions and hearing different answers and everything helps with that, because you have some form of consistency where you can be a bit more data driven with how you're judging candidates, which is difficult when it comes to people. And yeah, diversifying the pool of people that interviews is super important, because as well as, like, making sure that you're getting different opinions, there's also things with, like, different lived experiences that will mean that red flags might be spotted, that if you had the same kind of people interviewing, like, that wouldn't have been seen. That can be the case. Like, people feel things differently. Like, there's things that they'll spot that you might not have spotted otherwise, and it's super important.
I just back up that I think, you know, it's really important to keep as much consistency as possible. You know, obviously, natural flow of conversation could go in multiple directions, but I think if you're asking a consistent set of questions, you're giving people an equal opportunity to
Exactly
offer their solutions there as well, and you can compare those quite objectively.
Yeah, because there'll be a point where, if you've done it enough, you kind of know what kind of answers to expect. Really, at that point, you're like, these are the things that, like, are gonna be something that will add to the company. these are the things that like will show critical thinking and emotional intelligence, like the soft skills that are important for someone to be bringing into a company. But to just backtrack a little bit, I'd like to talk as well about job descriptions. And so we know that it's really important to, like, job description can have a big impact on who you're hiring. And we've talked about like experience and not requesting like for someone to have, 5 ship titles to be able to get into the industry. Is there anything else that you think can be good for a job description to keep in mind, and I think that could be done to help with it?
Yeah, I think maybe actually one of my bugbears is that I don't in this industry I actually don't see many entry level or junior positions just in general. I know that's a little bit off from like job description specifically, but the it really strikes me how there's a lot of want for talent and a lot of sort of want for people to move into the industry, but there isn't a lot of opportunity for people to gain the skills that are very industry specific in a sort of way that invests in people and brings them up through the industry. I notice this in almost every discipline in the industry. There's a lot of this kind of moving around of senior, you're always looking for senior positions. And when I look at those senior positions, I'm like, that's terrifying. What you want for these senior positions is terrifying. Where are the sort of opportunities to climb towards that kind of role? That those don't. There's a huge disparity. It's quite scary.
It's a catch-22.
Yeah,
really.
It becomes because if we hear that that you're an industry veteran after 5 years, I find that a really scary number. And to become a senior, you are senior after 5 years. That's not the same in other industries. That's a bit of a tangent, but it just sort of struck me that as far as what is expected in various roles is really specialized and sometimes quite bloated.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting point. So, I mean, there's no one answer for how to, write the perfect job descriptions or how to find the right people. But I think for me, some of the things we do are in terms of like the questions we ask ourselves, and some of those things are in terms of how we draft job descriptions. So one thing we will ask ourselves, for example, is this a job that a junior person or an associate level person could potentially do? That obviously takes us away from a mindset of, okay, let's just find the most experienced person ever to do every single role, because some people don't have years and years of experience, but they could do the job if they had the right sort of mindset and background, and obviously there's a potential for them to be trained in the role. If you want to look at it from an economical perspective as well, that person might be less expensive for the company to hire, but there's obviously mutual benefit. You're giving someone experience, and you have someone who's hungry and eager to learn. In terms of actual job descriptions, I don't think we tend to be super specific about the level we're looking for. And the truth is, sometimes we'll go into a role thinking there might be a certain profile, but we're very open-minded about that. Because again, you could be, for example, a developer with 1 year's experience, or a developer with 5 years experience, or maybe you have no years industry experience, but you might have some practical example of your work. So when we hire for roles, we could hire someone more junior, we could hire someone more senior, but we do keep an open mind there, and we tailor the job description to think more about skill sets more than years of experience. We never say things like number of shipped apps or shipped titles. In fact, we don't even necessarily specify you've had to work in tech, which is another thing. So yeah, I think it's important to try and think how you can reduce friction for your candidates. I think another sort of general point I'd make is just thinking about the language that you use. And also the hiring manager doesn't have to be the only person who writes a job description. You often have people internally who might be good at, copywriting or creative writing, may be able to use language to better convey what your company's actually like, and also how to think of language which isn't necessarily biased towards a certain type of person. Also thinking, what do you consider to be a company benefit? I think if a company benefit is going to be a very, stereotypical video games activity, which is around drinking in a pub, for example, not that it's necessarily a bad thing, but if you're going to push that as a benefit, you may as well not include it at all, because that could put off certain candidates who think, okay, do I have to be involved in drinking culture, or perhaps it's not compatible with my religion, or any of these things that you might think about. As a parent, I can't be involved in all of these cultural ideas. So sometimes, less is also more. If it doesn't have to be on the job description or the job advert, do leave it out.
Mm-hmm.
No, I completely agree with that. I think language is really critical for a lot of JDs and a lot of these sort of positions that they come out. Like, I personally, if I'm reading something, I get vibes of lad culture, or if I get vibes, if I get vibes of lad culture, rightly or wrongly, my mind will go, okay, so lad culture, great. Well, I don't enjoy that. I don't enjoy how often sexist or misogynistic attitudes tend to come along with lad culture. I don't like how homophobic stuff tends to also come along with lad culture. I don't like how transphobic stuff tends to come along with lad culture, and I don't like how racist stuff tends to come along with lad culture. It might not necessarily be all those things happen in a particular studio, but if I see things like,
Work hard, play hard.
yes, like think that work hard, play hard, or like I'm trying to think of something that's more common, because all I have in my head is a particularly strange job advert that is seared into my mind that included references to masturbation as a job description, which you wouldn't see in any other industry but this one. And I remember reading this and going, what? just what? And after I went, what? I was like, oh, yeah, well, this is games, and that's a really bad, feeling to have on this. But on the other hand, I've seen some really excellent job descriptions which are, saying Adam, were very skills based, because there's something. I think as someone who was raised as a woman, when I read a lot of job descriptions that are sort of laden with very masculine terms that are sort of unseen, or are very kind of to do with sort of number specific stuff, that I'll go, well, I don't have 5 years experience doing that. I'm no good for that. I'm not, they'll never consider me because of that number. Whereas, particularly cis white men will look at a job description, not have all the experience, and go, meh, I'll go for it anyway. But that's not how marginalised folks necessarily look at job descriptions. So things that are more skill based, can you work as part of a team? Do you have creative problem solving? Are you able to? Do you have copyright? All these sort of things that sort of break down projects, as opposed to when you say must have shipped a game. What does that mean? Like, what are the skills that were involved in shipping the game? Was it to do with programming? Was it to do with art? Was it to do with copywriting? Was it to do with what was it? Was it project management? What is it? Because shipping a game could mean many, many things. What is your studio specifically looking for from that, and sort of questioning what it is from that almost task-based things that could be skill-based. And I think it's asking the person who's recruiting to spend time really drilling down to what do you want to fill this role? what is it you're actually looking for in terms of what this person will be doing, and making that very clear to people who get their eyes onto things. Like I've looked at various roles that, you know, I kind of said to myself, I can do this. I know what this is, but the way this is phrased is, I don't think they realized it was very intimidating, but it's wildly intimidating. I think like these, and I think you're right, I'm absolutely, to sort of say, can I get eyes on this? Can I get someone else's eyes on this? Can I get a woman to read this, please? Can I get someone who's not white to read this, please? It seems very baseline, but it does, I think, go very well.
Yeah, I mean, so I was just also thinking, no, actually, it's quite funny because I remember when I was a kid, just one English lesson in particular, it was in this lesson, it was specifically about how you use language to ask questions. Like your question shouldn't be influencing a specific answer. And it's just one of those lessons that's always stuck with me. But it's interesting how we tend to slip into old habits. But I think just one question I wanted to maybe fire back at both of you as well is like, what are your thoughts on salaries on job descriptions? Now, I've seen such a wide range of like opinions and views on this. Probably have my own personal experiences of, pros and cons. But yeah, I'd be just interested to hear.
So from my perspective in particular, I think more transparency is always better. Like transparency with salaries, I think is like the thing that will get us to the next level of treating employees more fairly, etc. Like it's something that's missing. And from my personal experience, negotiating for salary is something that I've always massively struggled with, because and that's part of like all the unconscious biases of like I'm not supposed to be fighting for salary. I'm supposed to be thankful for what I'm given, because that's kind of like what you'd expect from a woman traditionally, is to be very thankful, etc. And so it's something that I've had to fight against myself with actively, to be like, no, I'm not going to tell you what my current salary is. I'm going to ask you for the budget that you have and work from there. And like, those are such difficult things to do. But if it's there and if it's transparent, not only like it prevents someone applying for a role that they might be overexperienced with, or might just be like paid too much right now for the budget that the company has. So like that, there's a lot of awkwardness that can happen there, especially if people are switching industries. Like, because the games industry is so secretive with salaries, it's very difficult to understand that like you're going to be within their budget effectively. And so that prevents that, and that prevents that whole kind of awkward thing. But also it just, kind of like makes it open and levels that playing field for everyone. So yeah, I'm a strong believer in, I understand that it's so complicated and there's so much like behind it that makes it so difficult to do. But I think that it's something that I'd like to see like in the next 5 years as becoming more normal in the industry.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one of the things I found a real learning curve was how rare it is to see the salary, or like even a salary band. Like again, higher education, you wouldn't dream of putting out, unless it's like director of service, like way up where you're sort of saying competitive salary. You wouldn't dream about putting out a job description without at least the salary band, because it's so kind of coming to games and going, yeah, but how much is this versus that one? Is that actually it's very confusing. It takes both time to sort of learn what your worth is, what the worth of each discipline is for a start, and also to kind of build up the network and the confidence to say, I know this is a really embarrassing question. We don't talk about money in the UK, but how much do you earn? Like, it's almost like I found a lot of learning about rates and salaries has had to come through basically whisper net style. Like, I'm thinking about charging this for the day. How much do you charge? Or how much? And is this too much? And having someone say, no, you're way undercharging yourself, you fool. But you wouldn't know that without having the confidence to be able to sort of speak to others about that. And it is also an awkward kind of question, because I think that there's such a disparity in what games pays. I've got some wonderful friends who I'm like, Jesus, you earn what? I've never seen that much money in any role I've ever done. And it's both awkward for you and awkward for them, because this is not an industry that has a massive sense of hierarchy in the way that I think other industries do. So you don't necessarily know someone's level or worth just by chatting.
Yeah.
And I think it also, I think, transparency is valuable, not just for the kind of sense of worth, but the question of, can I afford to take this job?
Yeah.
If you are, for example, a parent or a single parent, or you have disability, or you need to relocate, or if you are the sole earner of your family, whatever, the question of, can I afford to take this job, needs to be at the sort of forefront, because there's a lot of, I think, emotional work that goes into the process of applying for jobs as well, particularly for marginalised folks. Like, you're desperate to get a job, you're desperate to perhaps advance in your career, you're desperate to get out of the industry that you're in, and you want to get into games. But can you afford it emotionally to go through all the work, do all that struggle, and do that additional emotional work of going, okay, I've got to present my most confident self, my best responses, my most polished self, I know what I'm doing self, and you get to that very, very end, and you realize you cannot economically afford to take the job. If you'd known that at the start, you go, right, my energy pool is going to go for something else. And I think it also does the industry does outprice people with caring responsibilities. If you go, no, I need to make this much minimum in order to provide the level of support for my family, whether that's children, whether it's a partner, whether it's whatever, that I think does a lot to outpricing women who are parents, just in general, but tend to have a lot of other kind of unseen economic things to put money towards. So knowing if salary is worth the work, if it's worth that move, is really, really important.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to quickly mention so just some of the complications and downsides of salary publishing that I've noticed over the years. Often, if you put a salary target on your role, but you know that internally you're willing to take people of a wide range of experience, that has often put off people who may want to be paid more or paid less. It's a really funny problem in the sense that you can be super transparent about the salary, but the salary itself can give off a certain perception. That's quite an interesting challenge. But in terms of something not just me, but obviously my organization and some other organizations do, is we do tend to bench our kind of like roles and levels according to the industry, the wider tech industry. And I think, maybe this is just a bit of advice for the viewers of the talk. I think having an idea of salary benchmark for your position, your experience, is really important, because that arms you with the tools to have a reference point where you can say, okay, well, this is a benchmark for a mid-level project manager, whether that's, it doesn't really matter whether that's, X years of experience or Y years of experience. If you're mid-level, this is probably about what you're going to be able to earn. So that's a tool that any prospective employees can also use. And chances are the company has benchmarked the role towards some kind of level as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So moving forward now. Like we did it. We hired a diverse staff of like full of people. How do we? Yeah, yay! How do we keep them? How do we make sure that career progression happens? And how do we make sure that the company is inclusive and that it's welcoming to people from all backgrounds? Like, what are the big basic bare minimum things that studios need to consider? Don't fight.
I think one thing that's sort of quite key is to really listen to your diverse hires when they bring matters to you. I think there's we're in a very interesting kind of place right now where I think there's a lot of interest in hiring diversely, but there's not so much question about how do we make this a comfortable environment for this potentially one diverse hire that we've got, and ensuring that actually that they are comfortable in what they're doing. And it's a very, very tricky sort of situation because people don't want to rock the boat. You arrive somewhere, you go like, got the job, amazing. Oh my God, it's not quite what I was expecting. My co-workers are, actually co-workers are nice, but they occasionally make little comments that aren't so nice, that are innocuous, which are these kind of microaggressions that are mean well or are but hit a bit strangely or just are a little bit ignorant, things that make it very, very difficult for folks who are marginalized to sit comfortably, but then also go, this makes me really uncomfortable. But it's not so bad. They're not, not really racist. It's not really transphobic, not really sexist, but it's on the cusp. I think making it possible to hear people if they want to bring that up, say, hey, I had this big deal, but I want to address this. Can you support me in some way? Being willing to talk through that in private and not blow it up into a big social media thing or a big office-wide discussion, I think goes a long way. But also being willing to step up and say, on behalf of other people, let's not do that. Let's not make that kind of joke. It's not that same thing. Like, that's not, and make yourself take some of that work off your marginalized hires to take, so it's not always them saying, I think what a lot of us get nervous about is being a nag. Being, not only that, the person who is not like the rest of the group, but also a bit of the stick in the mud, you're not fun, oh, you can't take a joke, like, it's not that big a deal, it's not that serious, and it starts to weigh on you both as a sort of social thing, also emotional. And so having the wherewithal to challenge that soft discomfort that you see, if you see someone who's looking uncomfortable, to step in and say, let's change the subject, or let's not joke about that, or challenge it in careful, considered ways. It doesn't have to be a massive fight. It doesn't have to be a massive, confrontation, but just a, let's not, yeah? Because I think if you are in a position of, frankly, privilege, where you can take that social hit, take the social hit. It will roll off you much, much more easily than it will someone who is not as position. I think that's one thought.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a few tips for organisations. I mean, firstly, Leon made a good point that I want to echo, is that you can, if you come from a place of privilege, or you're not one of the marginalised people within the organisation, you should make it your responsibility to be a supporting voice and a champion for those marginalised people. So whether that is speaking about, calling out problematic conversations, whether that is noticing that the marginalised member of the team doesn't speak up in meetings, or their ideas aren't heard, everyone in society has a responsibility for breaking down these barriers, and it doesn't really cost you anything. So, go ahead and do that. So that's what people can do on the individual level. I'll slightly expand that. So let's say there's a global issue such as the Black Lives Matter movement, police brutality, which is also not just in the USA, but we have these sorts of issues. Don't wait till the marginalised people talk about it. It's probably good for you to approach the subject itself and say, okay, how are these people within your organisation faring? Have I asked them how they are today? How do you feel about what's on the news? I'm here if you want to talk. And people from all levels of the organisation can do that. Some other tips. So just reel off a list here. So having things like diversity statements, I think that's really good. Like telling people internally and externally what your views are on, on things like race, racial inclusion, gender equality, LGBTQ rights. If you have internal policies on this, and even better if you advertise those too, then at least both you and the rest of the staff in the companies know that there's a certain standard you need to reach. Like, this is our policy on LGBTQ inclusion. If you say something that's against that, we can literally point to the policy and say, this is incompatible with what we do here. Hopefully you won't get to that stage because people have read the policies and they've agreed to them as well. So yeah, policies can be really helpful. They allow you to also allow individuals to hold the company to account. In terms of things like, promotions and career advancement, remember that marginalised people, whether that is in terms of their experience, their gender, their race, class, etc., they're probably going to be less forthcoming about asking for pay rises or training and development. Some people might be used to asking for these things for their whole lives and receiving them. So as a hiring manager and as a lead, you should be forthcoming with, okay, this person has been here for X amount of time. In line with their experience, this is probably what their pay should be. And actually think about having a structure where you can offer that. Consider bonuses which don't have to be asked for. Consider offering that, approaching the subject about career advancement and development first, rather than asking for your employee to come to you. Because some employees won't ask for years, especially, again, if they're from a marginalised background. And then maybe just a final thing, we could probably talk about many different things you can do, but depending on your organization's capabilities, think about getting third parties involved as well. If you have like a complaints process, does it have to be done internally by HR? Could there be a third party adjudicator that can look at it from a very unbiased point of view? And can you bring external training resources and consultants internally to help you deal with either certain situations or build a more welcoming environment for people? So, in a sense, there's so many things we can do individually and on an organizational level. So I think at this stage, there shouldn't be any excuses.
Yeah, to add to that as well, is like destigmatizing complaining can be super important, like making sure that you have a very transparent and clear bullying and harassment process that kind of outlines all the steps to, like, when you approach HR to complain, here's what's going to happen. Like, here are the steps, so that if someone feels that if someone thinks that they have a complaint but they're not sure about it, then they can just read through it and be like, this isn't that scary, I can do this, I can do this route. And it just it helps create that idea of trust as well, to make sure that people feel more comfortable speaking up about it, especially related to current events such as the one you mentioned, and just all current events, especially in games, and doom scrolling on Twitter is a thing. Giving people access to mental health support is super important. So making sure that there's places that can go, that there's counselors that they can speak to, especially making sure that those are there for your marginalized employees when Black Lives Matter and police brutality is in the news, and it's just like all the videos are there that you're reaching out to your employees of color to be like, here's our sources, here's what you can do to get mental health help if you need it. Because like coming from that place of empathy of like understanding that these things will impact those employees more than most, and just like be prepared and be ready to be there and support them. That those kind of things, like those are the little things that overall over time will make the place feel like you can speak freely, you will be supported if things don't go well, but that there's a group of, like, the studio has your back effectively, that there's people there that you know you can speak to about those things like when it happens, and that you won't be pushed to the side if that happens. Like you won't be silenced and put in a corner because you've decided to speak up.
I think it sounds, in a sort of illustrative way, I think it's like if you imagine that your marginalized employees are carrying a tremendous amount all the time, like there's physically carrying a load of boxes, and they're trying to balance the work, the life, the doom scrolling, the Me Too, the Black Lives, and they're doing this. Why don't you help them open a door? Like it's because if they then kind of like also have to think about, oh, I need to probably to think about promotion, or oh, there's an opportunity I need to go for, but I haven't got time to. If you don't have to carry all the stuff that they are, if you think you could just say, hey, let's talk about, there's this thing coming up. I think you'd be really good for it. Do you want to talk about it? Or hey, I think you're coming up to promotion. Would you like to just? It might be good to think about advancement. Shall we schedule some time to talk about that? Or hey, we've not done a PDR for a while. Should we sit down and have? So taking that initiative to open doors for people, not in the sense of, I think when we talk about opening doors, it sounds very in the sort of area of nepotism as opposed to assisting. And I think if we were to think of things in terms of the assistance metaphor, help open a door, that was a fair bit to say.
Yeah, and on top of that as well, making sure that you aren't relying on your marginalized employees to teach you what it's like to be marginalized, and to have them run the diversity and inclusion things, like do all that extra work that will take a lot of their emotional energy is super important. Like make sure that as leaders of studios, you're reaching out to them to see how you can support them instead of waiting for them to ask you for support. Just like be there and be there with your unconditional support and be like, I will do the things that you need me to do, instead of just like waiting for them to carry that torch and to lead the way for your company in terms of diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, I mean it's almost a bit of a, I don't know, modern cliche these days, but Google's for free.
Yeah.
But I mean it in all seriousness. I think, one of the best things people can do to learn more about what marginalized people go through is to do research. We've got this vast network of the internet, which can tell us so much about people's historical experiences going back hundreds of years. Use Google, use encyclopedias. Wikipedia is not as bad a resource as some people think. Has its citations as well. Read books. Even if you have to go to the, I don't know, race section of Waterstones, or not plugging any specific bookshop, any bookshop of any name.
Hashtag not sponsored.
Exactly. Any bookshop of any title, go to those sections, look for reading material. To be fair, you might have a little bit more time to read it than one of your marginalized people who's worrying about living that experience. So yeah, if you can make the first step, then it can make you a better ally as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with that entirely. And I think also, I think, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but folks, I certainly feel an impulse to answer questions, like this sort of like, I want to help. I want to, to make things better. I want to offer what insight I can, and having to like take the time to go, that's not my job right now, or it's not up to me to do this entirely, and having to really actively sort of draw back and go, can't right now, I won't right now. Yes, Google exists. Google it. I think for something that I think goes a fair way in terms of these sorts of moments, like if you have questions that you ask your marginalised members of staff, to just graciously accept that sometimes they might say, no, I'm not answering that for you. No, I'm not. I might tomorrow, or I might next week, or I might some other time, but right now, I'm sorry, no, go Google it. Because, an example that I'd have from, when I teach, when I do things to do with trans awareness or trans 101, if I'm teaching, if I'm doing a specific session on supporting trans people in the workplace, doing that, this is my job, this is what I'm doing. If I'm taking my dog for a walk, I don't necessarily want to answer questions on hormones or how I feel about J.K. Rowling, or what genital surgery I will or won't have, or whatever. Like these really, these are questions that are not for that, like not for when I'm just going out to get something to eat or walking my dog, or I say all these things as though we're not social distancing, but like you know what I mean? The sort of like, sometimes I'm walking my dog, I'm just walking my dog, I'm not walking my dog, I'm being your trans teacher. And I think just having that sort of empathy to understand that sometimes you don't want to talk about the state of the world, or you don't want to talk about that subject matter that you happen to embody. Like a lot of us don't get the choice to embody what we are, and we are. And being able to not take it personally if someone says, you know what, not now, not today, some other time, but not right now. And I think that goes a tremendous way too.
I think I'd also just, another tool that we all have, defer to organisations. I mean, we exist in an era where POC in Play does exist for the industry. It's full of industry experts, all from ethnic and racial minority backgrounds. Our organisation's run by volunteers, but anyone can contact us, whether it's about advice or even to be pushed into another place. You've got Balance Patch. You've got organisations that deal with other specific marginalised people, whether it's could be accessibility, organisations like Special Effects, Autistica. The list is endless. I think it's really important to reach out to organisations that can do some of that heavy lifting, and a lot of that advice you can get is also going to be relatively free. Not that I'm saying that you should rely on people's free labour, but there are organisations out there which are willing to help make things better for everyone.
Yeah, well, that's a great note to kind of end it all on. Thank you so much for everything, for like all your knowledge. This was really great. I had a really good time, and I hope everyone that was watching had too. Anything else you want to say before we end this?
Wash your hands, wear a mask.
Also, stay home, save lives. But also, I mean, just generally from my perspective, if you are interested in the diversity inclusion work that POC in Play does, you can find us on pocplay.org, email contact@pocplay.org, or on Twitter @POC in Play. I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to look for me.
Yeah, more serious. More seriously, you can find what I do on balancepatch.co.uk. My social media things are there. I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn as well. But always happy to chat, always happy to talk. Always happy to do what we can.
Oh, well, search my name on Twitter. My DMs are always open if you want to chat about anything. Thank you so very much, and bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.